Everyone, I'm Lars. I work at Vercel on the AI SDK. And today I want to talk a little bit about AI SDK 5, how the overall landscape has changed, what the big breaking point is, why we developed AI SDK, why such a big change. Go a little bit into the details of how AI SDK 5 is different from AI SDK 4, and then also look a little bit about upcoming features. So in the last 2 years, LLMs changed and AI applications changed. If you think 2 years back, LLMs essentially just generated text, and then tool calls came in, and they got increasingly sophisticated, right? They started generating images, there was image input, and there was audio input. Suddenly the models were like full-on multimodal. MCPs came out, we had thousands of tools. The applications, as a result, also became more sophisticated. You want to generate components that you render in the UI. You don't just want to have a simple chat anymore, right? You want to have sub-agents and a lot of things. And so for AI SDK, as shown in the previous talk, by the way, I really love seeing things that are built on the AI SDK, and I think the React Native Apple AI is one of the most amazing things I've seen in terms of providers. So big thank you to Callstack for doing that. Can't wait to play with it. This is amazing. So AI SDK abstracts providers. And if you add features every month, so we did very incremental development, eventually you have a problem, right? For us, we got stuck in our development because we added features. So to give you an example, DeepSeek reasoning came out. I think it was in January. So we added DeepSeek reasoning. We had to add reasoning to our model specification so the models can send reasoning information. DeepSeek did it in a very simple way. They just send reasoning tokens and send you a reasoning text, right? So nothing fancy what you would think. A month later, Anthropic introduces reasoning, but they don't just introduce reasoning. They sign it, they have retracted parts that are also signed, and you have to send the information exactly back to Anthropic, or they would reject the requests. Right? And so we baked that in because we wanted to move there relatively fast. And it worked, but it was ugly because we essentially started bleeding details of the Anthropic API into our abstraction. And then a month later, OpenAI releases what? Reasoning, right? In this case, as part of their computer use agent. And we looked at it and it was close to impossible to do it. Because when you abstract things, and this is what the whole foundation of the AI SDK is about, when you abstract things, you want to have several examples, ideally 3 to 5 at a minimum. But in the AI space, we had to always follow very quickly, right? New feature comes out and everybody wants reasoning the next day, right? And so you get stuck. And sometime in March, early April, we realized we're stuck. Not just what the specification is that we added on for a year and a half, but also on the UI side, where initially it was just text that you render in a chat. And then people wanted to have custom data, so we gave them custom data parts. But then it got more and more complex. They had different tool calls, and it was all untyped in the front end, right? And so you end up with a lot of spaghetti code on the front end. Your apps get hard to maintain. The harder an app is to maintain, the less sophisticated it can get, and so on and so forth, right? And so we decided we need something better. We need a little bit of a break to enable you to build really cool AI applications for the web with all the capabilities that LLMs give you now, which is vast, right? And so we started embarking on the AI SDK 5 project sometime in April, and it took us actually 3 months. It was probably before we released features several times a week, and then was we don't release anymore. We put everything in a alpha branch, wait, and after a month you get alpha. It was pretty stressful, but it enabled us to do 3, I think, fundamental things. So first of all, we completely revamped the provider specification. So everything is now on version 2, which makes it easier to implement different providers and makes the providers more powerful at the same time. Then, because of the front-end challenges, we figured that type safety is really important. When you have your tools, you have tool inputs, tool outputs, they are typed. You may want to have your own data, but you have different kinds of data. data is typed. The specific to your application is typed. You want the full type safety on the front end so you can actually build complex applications. Right? So we added that in and completely revamped our chat. And lastly, people were building agents. And still a little bit unclear to me how much of an agent framework you actually need. Maybe you just need a for loop or a loop, while loop, where you call tools, right? But you need to control that loop in a certain way. You need to select which tools are there, when the tools are called, maybe change the system prompt a little bit. This determine when everything should be stopped. So we added a few more controls in that regard. So updated and stable foundation. What has changed? First of all, models are multimodal now. And that doesn't just mean that they take like different modalities as inputs and outputs. It also means that these are ordered, right? It's not just a reasoning output and a text output and tool outputs. No, it's a reasoning output followed by a tool call, followed by a tool result, followed by more reasoning, maybe followed by text and image. And the order is actually quite important, right? So you can you need to have an ordered array of outputs. So that's a big change there. Then a lot of providers introduced provider-executed tools, that's what we call them. For example, OpenAI now has a variety of tools that actually run on their servers, such as image generations and MCPs, and we're still working on parts of that, but there are other tools as well, like web search, right? And it gets executed by OpenAI on their side, which is very different from the tools before, where you define your own function and the LLM calls you, sends you the inputs, but then you execute the function, right? Those get fully executed in the same call on the back end. So we added that. And then we realized that, especially with the OpenAI Responses API, the APIs before, they were all modeled after OpenAI Chat, essentially from 2 years ago, with a few extensions maybe. But now the APIs are very different. And the providers are starting to sign parts, and you really need to send everything back for the next message to work. So we added a lot of extensibility, where you can, when you implement a provider, you can send along all the information you need, let's say in the OpenAI Responses case, all the IDs, and they get correctly mapped back so you can have longer chats with any model. And on top of that, you actually saw two of the new provider APIs we added, namely transcription and speech generation, with a Callstack example with Apple AI. So we also extended this foundation a little bit. So that's point one, is the updated foundation for the AI SDK, which allows you to create providers for the LLMs of today. The second big pillar now is UI and chat. Right? So we're developing for the web. And it's not enough to just call an LLM and generate some text. You really want to have a web UI or React Native UI that enables you to have seamless, sophisticated chat experiences with custom components and everything. For that, you need type safety. So the things we added are UI message customization in 3 areas. You can send your custom type metadata for your application. So before we said we're going to send you usage information and the finish reason. We're not going to send you that anymore. You can send whatever you want. You just say, okay, this is my metadata. And maybe you want to have the creation timestamp or an avatar link or the token usage, but it depends on your app. And so you can now fully specify that metadata and have it typed. The second thing is data parts. Before you could send untyped data as part of the stream to the front end. But now you can say, hey, in my app, it's maybe a travel app, and the data I have is a booking for a hotel or an activity, and so these data parts have a specific structure that's very specific to my app. You can type that structure in the back end, in the front end, and then send those things as part of the same response stream to the front end and show specific components to the users for a very unique experience for your app, right? And the same thing we did for tool calls. So before you had tool calls that were typed in the back end, but now tool calls typed everywhere. So that means when you work in your React components and so forth, you get autocomplete, you get all the typing you need, and it just makes life way easier. And finally, we added a few other things to the chat. So, for example, you can swap out transports, meaning that in the React Native example, you don't have to have a server anymore. You can directly call stream text. You can implement a different transport than SSE. So we switched to server send events, which makes it easy to debug. But maybe you want to have WebSockets or something else, then you can just implement that. And so overall, the chat is now much more powerful for users, but also actually for implementers. So we had a case where we abstracted it all out, and then somebody was like, oh, I want to implement this for Angular. And it's just 200 lines of code. Right? And so we added that to the repo as well, because the chat abstraction itself is independent of React or Svelte or Angular or Solid. And so it's very easy to use it in any UI framework, or even in a, say, command line framework. All right, so that's the updated chat, which hopefully enables really great new chat applications. And then the last piece is agentic tool calling loops. So as I said, there is a little bit of a debate whether the agents of the future will be more workflow-like or just a loop with tools. The models get really powerful, really smart, and you just have a loop with tools. And so we build a little bit towards that future with this agentic control and the tool calling loop. And so you now have things like prepare step, where for each step that is essentially comes down to one provider call, you can determine, hey, this is the model I want to use, the system prompt I want to use, maybe you even want to compress the messages or change them. You can do all of that, can change temperature. And then you have stopWhen, which enables you to stop at any point, right? So there's this problem that the loop could theoretically go on infinitely. And so you have to say, hey, after 20 steps, stop, or after 100 steps, stop, or whatever makes sense for your app. But there may be other conditions too, if tool A is called, I want to stop, or if I spent $50, I should stop. And so you can now implement any stop function you want, really, and pass it in, and it gets the previous steps. You do whatever you want. So we're trying to make this more powerful. Also, there's now context, experimental context that is preserved between the different calls and that the tools can access. Right? So that's AI SDK 5. Those three different things are the change in a nutshell. And the idea is that you can use that to build the next generation of AI applications. Now, we don't stop there. So there's more we are building. What comes in AI SDK 5.1? AI SDK 5.1, which is probably, I would say, sometime in October, most likely, will include improved telemetry. So right now, you have different telemetry providers, such as LengthFuse, BrainTrust, LengthMiss. You can use for observability, but it's been experimental for a year. So we're going to revamp that whole area and make it easier to observe and hook into the LM calls that your users are making to record information so you can set up your eval loops and everything. That's one big area. The next one is editing images. We have generate image functionality, but we don't have edit image, which is a little bit more complex than you'd think because there are many different variants of edit image. Could be expansion, compression, make it more fine-grained, select an area and refine it. Many ways you can edit an image, but we want to add something there as well. And we also are going to extend the APIs, maybe not in 5.1, but further out with things like streaming, speech generation, and other things. So that's it. I wanted to leave a lot of room for questions, actually, so talk is a little bit shorter, but I also wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me here, and thank you all for coming.